So good afternoon, everyone. Again, we're happy to have Mike Hudson here from Michigan State University, and he's the Director of Students with Disability Services. And so he's going to be talking to us today about tips for transition. He would love for you guys to ask him as many questions as you have. His presentation is going to be centered around not just for teachers, but for students and for parents. You know, a lot of times our kids are not adequately prepared for college or for post-secondary education. And, you know, it's a rude wake-up call for them on many occasions. And so I felt that it'd be great for them to hear directly from someone, excuse me, who deals with this on a daily basis. I've been knowing Michael for many, 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 many years as a student, and we've done some presenting together at other, webinars or workshops and things. So it's very exciting today. And like Johanna said, please put your questions in the chat, raise your hands if you want to ask him a question. I'm here today with my three colleagues, Johanna Brufan, Sarah Kreshlow, and Amanda English, and they're going to keep an eye on the chat for us today. And Mike is going to tell us more about Tessa, who's going to be presenting with him. So Mike, it's in your hands, and I'm going to go on mute.
Great. Thank you so much, Pat. Appreciate the introduction. And Tessa, thank you for being our slide host today. You're probably on slide 1, I'm anticipating. Yes. And it is my honor to be here with Tessa Freer, who is our blindness specialist. Our program has emphasized focus areas of disability so that we can be deeply rooted and connected in areas that matter a lot to the students as they arrive at MSU. A very big place, but with a lot of depth and breadth to the program. Slide 2. I have a slide. I'm a humble person. I'm not a bragger in any way, but I will brag a little bit here because the reason I do that is because I want you all to know, and if you're a teacher, I want you to know the imperative help that your position, your work represents to people like me throughout the years and decades for our success. For parents and students, I want you to know that there is a bright future for you, and it requires a lot of hard work. It requires some good luck, and it requires some good networking and some skill prep. So there's something in this for all of you. The better I did in my career, the better I know you will do in the next generation. It's often said we stand on the shoulders of others that came before us. So I managed to get a high quality education all the way through the master's degree level. I have led a very good career at a very great institution. I have a family, a wife, and I have 2 kids, married for 28 years plus. I have had the good fortune of building networks throughout the community in different ways. And one I'm pretty proud of is I'm one of the only blind people in the nation on a many billion-dollar credit union board. So helping shape the financial futures of many people. So blindness has been a challenge, but it is something that, with the right people behind you and in your corner, you can do great things despite that dynamic. And then slide 3, Tessa. So it was not an easy path. It was a tough path from then to now. I was the first child in a family growing up in rural Saginaw County. My parents didn't go to college. They'd never had a child before me. And when I was a child, it would be dark and I'd crawl into a wall. They said, I wonder if there's something up here. I didn't know babies would crawl into a wall when it was dark. And after some vision testing, they found out I had a hereditary recessive trait called retinitis pigmentosa that was going to erode vision over my course of my lifetime. By age 3, I was diagnosed as legally blind. I had pretty good vision straight ahead and some pretty good peripheral, but I had a blind spot that I became aware of. My parents, so they didn't go to college. They knew the power of hard work and they knew the power of education to change lives from what they had seen around them. And they knew that their son was going to have to really consider how he would get skills to be effective. I had grandparents that were real creative problem solvers, grew up through the Depression, World War II era. And my grandfather was especially important for me. When my toys would break, he was a master mechanic in so many areas. Instead of fixing them for me, he taught me one of the most valuable lessons of my life. do it with us, not for us. So I'd go to his house to get my toy fixed. Before I knew it, I was in the basement with him. I said, but Grandpa, I can't tell the difference between a red wire and a green wire. He said, there's other ways to know that. That's just the color. That's the common person's way to do it. So we're going to teach you to think creatively and differently and not see the impossibilities. I had key educators along the way. People prodded me when I wanted to take a shortcut. I didn't want to do my homework. What kid does in 5th grade? But when Miss Lewandowski, when I tell her I couldn't do my homework because I got a headache from looking at it, and I tell my mom when I got home that I didn't have any homework, and when the two of them finally talked, and my mom was standing on the front porch when I got home and said, "Where's your homework?" And I said, and then they caught me, in other words. And so I needed I needed people to see more in me than I could see in myself at the time, and not let me get away with slacking when I didn't need to slack. And so they addressed the issues, cornered me, and I had no choice but to achieve. Special educators, when I was not ready or willing to accept blindness as my future because I had no good vision of what it would be, my special educators made it approachable for me. Doug Baldwin, my O&M instructor, found creative ways to get me to carry a cane. Yes, he had to take me outside of my district. Yes, he had to do night lessons. Yes, he also nested in some other education for me that made me more aware of the things that I might find in the future. Barbara Taylor, who was my VI teacher consultant in the days I was in elementary school in Saginaw, she taught me important skills like how to type when typing wasn't a common thing. They were foundational. They could see something that my parents didn't know and that I needed to acquire. Mentors along the way, other blind people when I met them, who were doing more than I was, who weren't saying I can't. They were saying I will, I must, I have. And sometimes it was because they grew up in a family that was normalizing blindness. My wife came from a family that had 2 older sisters. And so by the time she came along as a blind person, it was a rite of passage to get your cane. It wasn't a point of shame like it was for me. Braille writer, you were anxious to get your Braille writer. Me, I said, I don't need one of those things. And so it's all an approach, and you need mentors and role models along the way. So that's that slide, Tessa. We'll move along. So I didn't welcome it. I already told you that. I fought my disability. I fought the identity of it, and I denied it. And when I was a student in psychology and later on in grad school, revisited this Kubler-Ross person who talked about the stages of grief, and she framed it in the stages of dying. In many ways, I found those things to be relevant in my own life growing up. I wanted to deny that blindness, visual impairment. Maybe it'll go away. I was angry about it. I bargained, just let me, God, let me not have this happen. I'll be a better person. There was depression. And eventually, though, I did reach a level of acceptance. It is the way it is. I can't change it, but I can change how I work around it, how I perceive it, and what I do despite it. So that's kind of my primer. So you know who I am as I direct commentary later on in this presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Tessa for a number of slides here. Thank you, Tessa.
You're welcome. Hi, everybody. My name is Tessa Freer. As Mike said, I'm a specialist at our office. So I work with students, faculty, and staff who are blind and visually impaired at MSU. Them get accommodations, make sure that they have equal access to materials here on campus. Little background about me. I went to Western Michigan University, received a bachelor's degree in speech pathology in 2013 and a master's in vision rehab therapy in 2015. Before coming here to MSU, I worked at the Blind Rehab Center at the Cleveland VA. So it was an inpatient rehab center for veterans with vision loss. And I taught daily living skills, technology, everything basically except O&M to blind and visually impaired veterans. So I enjoyed that job a lot, but was excited to come back to Michigan where I grew up and have been here for almost 3 years at MSU. Okay, so I'm going to give some general information about our office and our population and the people that we serve. So our mission is here on this screen. We've got sort of a stylized image of a student guiding another student who's using a white cane as the background. So our mission is to lead Michigan State University in maximizing ability and opportunity for full participations by persons with disabilities. So just as I was talking about, we have lots of different specialists in our office for different areas. My focus is blindness, but we have specialists for mobility or students with mobility impacts, deaf and hard of hearing, chronic health, mental health. So regardless of a student's disability, we just want to make sure that everyone has equal access while they're here at MSU. I'm trying to switch the slide. I'm sorry. There we go. So let's talk about our population. So approximately 10% of college-age students report having a disability, and nearly 7% of the MSU Spartan students identify with our office. So as the most recent data we have is from 2022 listed here. It was 3,478 students registered with permanent disabilities with our office. 75 students documented visual disabilities, and 11 of these were registered with BSBP. So basically the point of this is there's a lot of students with disabilities here on campus. When we were sort of chit-chatting before the presentation started, people were commenting that MSU is a great place for students with disabilities to come because we have a whole team of people and a lot of resources to support students. So it's really great. This slide is about our vision, so I'll just read it out to you. Together, we create a welcoming environment, fortify capacity, and compassionately challenge each person to reach their fullest ability. Disabilities need not preclude achievement of goals and dreams. Rather, they mandate a greater level of creativity, commitment, and repertoire of compensatory techniques. We grow ambition into personal and professional success as we connect MSU knowledge, self-advocacy, innovative technology, and community. So again, this is just what we do as an office, right? We are looking for creative solutions. We are, using technology to help level the playing field for students and classes, helping students to self-advocate when they need that, and just building a sense of belonging for students here on campus, regardless of their disability. This is a little acronym ABLE here. So ABLE is in black letters on the left-hand side, and each letter has, a little explanation. So the A is for assess and document disability, academic, and workplace needs. So this is like when a student self-identifies with our office, this is sort of our first step. So students come to us and they say, I am a person who's blind and I'm coming to MSU. So then I ask them for documentation from a medical provider to get more information about their impacts and their functional needs. And of course, I'm mostly saying students, but this goes for employees as well. The B in ABLE is for build and facilitate individualized plans for reasonable accommodations. So after I receive documentation, I meet with every student individually to talk about their condition, the impacts, their needs, what academic program they're in, any challenges that they foresee or have had in the past, to come up with individualized accommodations. So 2 students who are both totally blind could have very different accommodations, just depending on them as a person, on their classes, their program, their needs. So I assess that individually. I'm the only blindness specialist, but other specialists do this for other disabilities as well. The L in ABLE is for link individuals with technology, education, and resources. So at MSU, we have a assistant director for assistive technology in our office. So he can meet with students, help them try out different technologies to see what will work best for them, for their needs. Resources, we like to connect students all across campus to programs like if they're a first-generation college student, if they need mental health counseling while they're here at MSU, if they're looking for a group of individuals, whether that's related to their disability or to another interest, we just want to get them connected while they're here at MSU. And lastly, the E in ABLE is for extend independence through auxiliary aids, disability-related information, and self-advocacy. So that one sort of speaks for itself. But that's sort of our function here as an office. So our team, the team of professionals at RCPD is ready to assist students, employees, and visitors with resources that create an environment for opportunity. So we'll send these slides out, but there's a link here to our team RCPD page. So that sort of lists everybody in the office, and you can identify someone by, the area that they work with, or just ask a general question and be directed to the correct person. It also lists visitors here with students, employees, and visitors. So, like let's say a student's graduating and their parent is blind. So they may need some accommodations for that event, or their parent or grandparent is deaf and they need to make sure there's captioning or an interpreter. Those are the types of things that we could help with for visitors. Okay, so I'm going to list out some RCPD specific resources from within our office. So as I mentioned, we have the Assistant Director for Assistive Technology, but we also have the Assistive Technology Center here at MSU. So this is a place that, students can come and work or meet with another student to get help with something, meet with the Assistant Director for Technology, or meet with me to try stuff out. There's just some examples listed here, like voice and braille output, text enlargement, voice input, reading equipment, tracking tactile map, guidance GPS, and different note-taking solutions. So lots of different options for students here in our office. And then we've also linked the assistive technology page. Again, these will be sent out. Another area that our office works really hard on is accessible textbooks and media. So I spend a lot of my time along with another person in our office here to produce accessible books and accessible media for students. So alternative format materials provide access to information and knowledge. So this could be in Braille, literary, or scientific, audio formats, large print, tactile graphics, or different electronic formats. And again, linked at the bottom of the slide here. So we have lots of different options for students.
Tessa, there is a question in the chat, and it's, do you train or teach people with the assistive technology as well?
Yes. Yep. To the best of our ability. Okay, so this slide is about our Braille Technology Advantage program. So this is a program in which we provide refreshable Braille displays to incoming and current Braille users in a degree granting program at no charge to them. It's the first program of its kind at a university. So this came out of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. It was before I was here, but the person who's in this position before me, identified this need for production of Braille materials, but then being able to get them to the student because all of the students were at home and learning virtually. So how are we going to do that? So we were able to use money from an endowment, I believe. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong.
Correct, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. From an endowment to purchase the displays and loan them out to students so we can produce just an accessible file and be able to send it to them and they have access to it right away. So this is great as a time saver. This is great for the, actually carrying around the Braille that was being produced versus just the Braille display. So it's really benefited our students. Again, it's linked here at the bottom of the slide. Okay, and then I am going to turn it back over to Mike.
Thank you, Tessa. The next slides, I said earlier, as I thought about my successes through the years, I credited teachers, I credited special educators, I credited peers and mentors. The next few slides really kind of talk a little bit to things that you probably already know, but I think are really important for families who don't have the experience in this area and for youth themselves to keep in mind. So probably if we have some of those viewers later on, or if you'll relay some of these ideas, you probably already do, because I suspect you know many of these things already. But I just wanted to say, I believe these things were pivotal in my ability to move through a system and probably a world that wasn't totally designed around my uniqueness. So So I would say these are components of ability as I define them. And one of those very important things that comes out of these skills is that reaching for confidence. You know, without confidence in our work, in our world, and our skills, our self-capability, it makes it harder to succeed. So I really always want to focus with students on how can we get you to be a confident person? You know, you're not going to be able to control for everything. There will be things that come along that you can't control, but how do we get you in a sense that most of the time I'm going to be able to conquer something? So I think that starts with some real skills. And as teachers, you know the value of those skills. As a child, I resisted them because, again, it wasn't part of my proper image of where I wanted to be, being blind. So using that cane, learning to use that cane and travel safely and effectively was a skill that I had to be almost tricked into accepting at that point in my life. And my parents really didn't know this either. So as educators, sometimes those skills are hard sells for young people, but I think they're super important to have. Whether it was typing when typing wasn't popular, whether it was that Braille writer that I resisted, was it holding on to a CCTV so long that I was putting large print books under a CCTV and blowing them up and making them super bright and vivid and burying my face almost on the screen and looking around and being very inefficient. I needed to acquire those skills. So we want to think about those, and you know this already. I think the hard work component, I think, some will disagree with me, but I think in the situation I was in, I couldn't rest. I never could just coast and be successful. I tried a few times, but thankfully teachers and parents cornered me and didn't let me. And that was a recurring theme. So that notion of hard work, if you want to be successful, you're going to have to put in probably, my parents always said, you got to work twice as hard as everybody else. And sometimes it felt twice as hard. Sometimes it felt 10 times harder. So that's there. Attitude. I think, many times you get cornered on the situations that come out of blindness and you feel angry, irritable, disadvantaged. Today they'll say microaggressed, but ultimately, the attitude you maintain is going to help you go through. So most people mean you no harm, and many people are there to help you in quiet ways at just the right moment. So keeping that positive attitude, a can-do attitude, was always something I needed to keep in mind and remember. The networking was something I did not know. I grew up in a family that, just hard workers all around, but not much of a network. And when I got into the situation I was in, I figured this out, having people see what you want to do, where you're going, and kind of getting behind you a little bit and helping you find the connectors that could make you successful was important. So I'd always tell kids and families, get connected, find other people who are facing the same thing you are, find people who maybe have a child that has the same challenge and they're maybe established in a career area and can help you make connections through their connectivity. Very important. So I'm going to move along to the next slide. So I'm going to say skills for ability. Building compensatory techniques, I say on this page. I think early on we need to identify as people who have disabilities the compensatory techniques that will make the difference for us. That was even in our vision, having a set or a repertoire of compensatory techniques. When you can no longer see the screen, how are you going to do it? When you can no longer accurately find a flight of stairs without, by using the vision that you've held on to as long as you could. How are you going to adapt to these? And just being able to see that and as normal in a healthy set of evolution is key. And I think as educators, you already know this, but it's not easy, is it? Many times to tell people, and you don't want to be a downer, that your vision condition is going to change, it's going to get worse. So let's teach this now while we have a chance and you're not totally under the pressure of absolutely needing to do it. I think in retrospect, my one regret was that I didn't own this earlier and I hung on to the visual cues as long as I could, and I didn't learn Braille during my formative years. My wife reads Braille very fast. I do not, and so it was probably one of the impediments. Thankfully, I found another compensatory technique. I was one of the first into the high-tech solutions, and I've throughout my career been a pioneer in making computers do more for us to get ahead of some of the challenges. I want to always remember that overcoming disability challenges is just a life challenge, and when you get good at overcoming challenges, you in fact are developing creativity. So I always want kids to know, these aren't easy things, but when you do it, you're forcing yourself to think a little divergently, be a little more creative, and be persistent, of course. But creativity and problem solving is what life is really about. That's what our workplaces need of us. They need us to see a challenge and not just say, this is a problem. They need us to say, this is a problem, and here's 2 ideas for how we could fix it. So I think being cast into a disability situation in many ways also, if we're successful, forces us to be innovative and creative. And so I always want people to remember that component. And that's the end of that slide. Another slide of skills for ability. I think identifying things that society needs has always been the way forward for people, whether it was a business entrepreneur who found a better way to open a can or a better way to preserve a product. Finding things that people see differently, and sometimes our differences provide us with a vantage point that lets us see something that others didn't see as a solution. So again, I wanted to be normal when I was a kid, and normal to me was having good eyesight. And I realize in retrospect, I should have embraced some of the differences and just said, how am I doing things differently? And how could this be part of a problem-solving mantra? I think people need to find something that has a vocational potential for them. And, many times we say we're blind and we can only do this or that, and that's the course, many times it's prescribed, if you're going to be blind, you'll go and you'll do that career track or that one, because we know it's pretty well paved. But some of the most interesting people I've met at MSU and throughout my career were people who said, I really have a passion for something and I want to do it. And yes, everybody's telling me you can't do it because you're blind, but finding those networks, the compensatory techniques, and the other things that let them do it is really the power of higher education to change lives, and we're all in it. We're all educators. So I think people need to pursue the knowledge that will get them towards their dream, and you go as far as you can, and you have to change sometimes, but you got to have the dream and you got to have the passion and you got to feel like, there's a path forward. And so I think that's the big thinking ideas that I always want people to remember. Where it happens, we have got great community colleges in our state. There's apprenticeships in many places, those job shadowing things that weren't very apparent to me as a kid in school. In high school, I didn't really have summer jobs because nobody could envision how I would go to work. And I think probably if I would have done that, it would have opened some other doors for me too. So it was probably one of my regrets that I didn't get those summer jobs that all my peers were doing. I had transportation problems in a rural area, so I could cite all the problems, but probably, a little more partnership between my teachers and my parents and me could have maybe made some things happen. And I think, when you find these things that you can actually see differently or pursue or have a passion for, how can we turn it into a profession, in this day of digital that we're doing now. Sometimes the distance, the travel, the transportation issues change, the dynamics shift. And so there's always a way to rethink things, and staying nimble in that is probably very important for people. And then always evolving to learn and figure out new paths because nothing seems to stay the same. And I feel like we're in a world that's just getting more and more rapid changes. And how do you stay doubled down on current knowledge? It's not easy, but it's something that we always need to remember. And so I'm going to switch slides again. So my next slide says tips for post-secondary transition. I say dreams are essential, and blindness itself doesn't need to stop us, but we need to be able to steer and partner in all those ways I mentioned earlier to navigate an obstacle-filled pathway to really reach our life's potential. And at MSU, we really want to see our students do well. And that's why we've been working since the 1930s when a sophomore honor group started to welcome blind students to campus and help them solve their reading and navigation challenges. And why when our program started, well before there was a legal mandate for a program like ours, that university spirit of innovation, of inclusion, has always guided, a very favorable path of possibility in higher ed. So I'm proud and pleased to have been associated with this institution through some very dynamic years, and happy that we've been able to build so many programs that help so many students see and reach their goals. I would say from your vantage points as teachers, there's a lot of lessons that it's easier to learn when you're not under the pressure of needing to perform for work or a rigorous college academic experience. I know elementary school is rigorous. I know middle school is rigorous, but it just keeps ratcheting up. And so while you're young, it's a chance to experiment, to just embrace the full range of tools that you may need in the future and be truthful about your future situation. If your vision is going to be stable, great. Then what you're doing today is probably sufficient in many cases. But even if your vision is stable today, aging brings some new dynamics for you. So when you suddenly don't hear as well as you used to, and you don't see very well either, those might be dynamics that an 18-year-old's not going to think of that stuff. So I know you're helping that, and you might be helping that with parents too, to see how do we prepare your student to be future-proof. So definitely easier to learn them before they become crises that cause you maybe to lose that job that you got and that you want to maintain. So it's higher ed and post-secondary ed's a great experimentation time. Next slide. So this next slide is more about, again, our university, our program, the Resource Center for Persons with Disabilities, like our peers across the state. We know education is vital. I know it. Without it, I would have been in a much different place. And how do we make it available? How do we help connect students? Because that's another great thing about being at a big school. Many times people see the big school as, oh, it's so big, I don't know if I could navigate the campus. But truthfully, when you get to a big school, Tessa's numbers earlier said, we've got more than 70 students here with some kind of visual impairment. Yes, 11 of them are registered with the BSBP in that data snapshot, but others come from other BSBPs across the state. And so we have a nice network of people who have experience, and it's the first time in your life you may be not the only one in your school that has this challenge. So, I'm pretty excited about our ability to build communities and that build that networking. And I always tell people, persist. It's possible. You've just got to stick with it. It's not easy, and you just don't quit, is usually my bottom line. Next slide. So I talk about the arrival at college. What do I want students to arrive with here when they arrive? That's duplicative. What do I hope they'll arrive at MSU with? I think they need to have a sense of spirit of adventure and learning. I know we want to do well. We don't get a B, we're failing in our minds sometimes, because we've always been, hard workers, and, we got those A's in high school. And it's not always possible to maintain that. So I want to remember these are the best years of students' lives, and maintaining that spirit of adventure and learning and curiosity is it's important, just like getting a good grade is, and going to class and being reliable. I would say as educators, as you can, test them with problems that they're going to have to face. What happens when I turn my computer on and the keyboard doesn't work? What does that mean? Catherine Hula and I, when we used to teach the programs of prepared teachers, the visually impaired back in the 90s, we'd always say, you've got a brilliant student, you go and unplug the keyboard, and they don't know how to even troubleshoot that. That is a life problem. So I always want you to remember, how can you help them think a little out of the box? Give them a few curveballs. Your computer's not starting today. What are your solutions? How are you going to navigate that? Do you have a smartphone? Can you look at the screen when it stops talking and figure out what's happened? Or do you just going to shut down and quit? I think coming to school with differentiation is important. We focus on the academics, but how many students, and I walk by today and you say hello and they don't say hello back. I realized a lot of them are wearing headphones now though, but I think during that pandemic, we built a generation that's really not as comfortable, or they're a little more clumsy in social interactions. So, if we can get our students to be if you're old enough to remember Dale Carnegie, the one who can start a conversation, who can get a dialogue going and humanize the situation and have a little fun, when you get a little stuck or confused or lost in a setting, have some fun with it and build a network. I think that is very important, differentiate yourself and be a communicator in a time when there's not as much of that going on. Be positive, have a great attitude. So that's that slide. Next. The hard work component, I've doubled down on it because it's what my family growing up understood. I remember my dad, how hard he'd work at something. Later I said, Dad, you wouldn't have had to do that if you would have just been a little bit more creative. But the ethics of hard work are so important. I remember as an undergrad getting ready to go to grad school, because with my undergrad degree, I knew I needed to go to grad school to have a career. Fred Mickles, the then director of the library up at Lake Superior State University, where I did my undergraduate years, I said, I'm real nervous, Dr. Mickles, about this next step, grad student. I'm the first to go to college. I don't know if I can do it. And he said, well, you can. And just remember, it's 80% persistence and 20% intelligence. And he said, you've got both. And so that was a message I've never forgotten. When things got tough, I said, just don't quit, just keep going, show up. And that's what I want young people to know. You know that as teachers already, but how do we convey that to them? I think identifying a couple talents that you're really pleased with. For me, in the 1980s, when I was in high school and then started college, a computer was a big thing. I decided that if my vision got worse, this computer might well be my solution. There were starting to be some speech synthesizers that were affordable for the individual. And I remember going home one break and say, I've got to figure this out. And so I became a real technologically sophisticated person. I was the first person to carry a laptop around campus, and it was a differentiator for me. It made some friends like, wow, you got a computer that you can carry with you. But more importantly, it gave me a tool set that I could build on and develop. And actually, I could tell some fun stories about all those years I used that old magic marker to write on that dark line paper, and I'd write so slow and I could never keep up with the notes. And then when I'd go to study the notes at night, I'd get a headache from trying to read it. And I was a subpar student. I was getting 2.8s in college initially. And it wasn't until I met one of my professor advisors she said, what are you going to do after this? I said, go to grad school, because that's what you have to do with a psychology degree. She said, with these grades, you will not be going to grad school. And that was that hard knock. It was a gulp. I think I probably almost passed out. And I said, I've got to do better. I got a computer. I outfitted it with speech. I went back to class. He had to sit next to the wall because the battery lasted for about a half an hour. Plug it in. And I started taking notes, and I could type fast thanks to Barb Taylor from Saginaw, Michigan, my TVI. And I could type so fast. And for the first time in my life, I was liberated. I was typing faster than my peers. And one of them raised their hand, hey, Prof, stop lecturing at the speed he can type. We can't write that fast. And so I found it's just a piece of joy that came out of that, and how being differentiated and being clever and using a tool set that others hadn't discovered yet could be life-changing. So I've always used that as a tool. And anytime you can differentiate, and my grandfather taught me home improvement and repair skills that other friends that are sighted around me don't have. And so these points of differentiation help me do things, and they help me be valued and viewed by people in ways that, blindness alone wouldn't do. And I find this with some of my most successful peers. My friend Richard Bernstein, the Supreme Court Justice of Michigan, distinguished in law, yes, but when he became a triathlete, a runner, and Aaron Scheides, who graduated, when these people used athletics to do something different, it changed the conversation. So develop a skill, do something a little different, and be remembered for blindness, but also be remembered for the things that you can do that others wouldn't have thought of initially. So And then the last idea on the slide is reliability. If you say you're going to do something, do it, you know, and that's about persistence, I think, as well. So that's that slide. Next slide is dedicated to networking, something I said earlier I didn't understand. Find other people like you. I never knew another visually impaired blind person like me when I was going to school. There was one in the school, but he was like 4 years ahead of me. So I was coming in, he was leaving. I heard the legends of him. I heard how cool he was, but I never really got to spend time with him. And, you know, again, my parents and me did not think much about being blind. That was not where we were headed. And so I didn't go to a lot of things. I do remember going to Camp Tush Mahita once, and that was a life changer. First time I met some other people who were high achievers despite blindness. And it's the first time I said, wow, that guy sees way less than I do. And look at what he's doing. I'm not so sure I'm ready to do that. So it was a mind setter. So I think there's huge power in that networking, and any of you working on those summer camps and special programs that bring people together, congratulations, it's important. Find others in places where you want to be and spend time with them. I remember when I met our first Michigan state representative who was blind. Bob Mahoney was a pioneer, a guy who as an individual younger blind person was selling bleach and brushes and rugs door to door. And when he had a heart problem and they said, you can't do that anymore, sir, he said, I've got to reinvent myself. And he ran for office and he became Michigan's first blind state representative. And he did a marvelous job and he became a role model. So just that sort of notion. And that's why when I started this presentation, I was willing to do just a little bit of bragging about some of the things I've accomplished, because having kids see you as doing something that they just don't think blindness means you can do is really life altering for people. Find networks that can challenge you, you know, people doing more, and follow them and stick in there. I knew a lot about tech, but when I went to my first CSUN conference, I said, wow, there's people that know a lot about this that I don't know. I'm feeling like a sophomore or a freshman now in this class of IT capable people. So that was a network that challenged me, and I think it's important to always find people doing more than we're doing, and you know, but are like us. So next slide. I'm going to tell you about the one of the things we've done at MSU. Tessa shared some of the blindness specific things we were doing. This one is kind of generalized, but any BSBP people in the room, I'm going to say this was in many ways modeled for the great ideas that BSBP had. When we work with blind students at MSU, they shift their case down to MSU or the Lansing district office when a student comes to MSU. What that means for a university is we have a single point of contact with a well-known BSBP counselor who can help us solve problems. So therefore, working in this way, MSU has always been able to leverage the power of the agency to bring their resources to task, a person specialized in this, and we could do creative partnerships to bring new technology. MSU had early technologies that others didn't have because we partnered so well with the then MCB. So we built, I couldn't quite get this code cracked with the other agency, the Michigan Rehab Services. When they sent us students, or if we had a student who would benefit, I had to send them back to their home county. They had to go there during business hours when they should be in class, and they probably had to do it 2 or 3 times to open a case. So I said, I tried to get them to shift all their clients to one counselor down here. That wasn't going to be acceptable to them. So I said, how else can we do it? We used some private gifts, and we built a cash match agreement with them and built the first that we can detect in the nation Careers Collaborative, where we're working with MRS. We fund a position, get some match, and we have a rehab counselor assigned to us now to do our Careers Collaborative. And we try to keep the BSBP looped in, because they were really the pioneers, the idea of this good thinking. But I'm really pleased with what this has brought to MSU. It's a bridge between Voc Rehab, our program, our specialists, our students, and our career services network. We have a program that is rehabilitation counseling training. We seek partnerships with them, sometimes some opportunities for future professionals to see these sorts of things in action. So I want to brag about that Careers Collaborative and say, nice to have that kind of expertise that professionals in rehab bring. Next slide. I think a message to parents, to teachers, and to administrators, that's you. Do it with us, not for us. So many times people want to do it for you. It's just quick and it's easy. The best of you know that's not that's imperative. But I always appreciate it when somebody would take the time and say, Mike, if you just do this a little that way, this way, and they didn't do it for me, they coached me. It really gave me that ability to do things for myself increasingly. And so I could go into a lot of stories about how that worked out, but just keep it in mind. And I tell parents that too. It's quick to, I don't know, if it's something as mundane as helping your kid tie their shoe, tie it for them. Yeah, that's good for a while, but eventually they have to do it. So empower us to do more for ourselves. And that's a model I've used and tried to apply throughout our program. Strive to elevate expectations, see something in them that they can't see. Tell them about a role model, that's doing something interesting. Connect them, help them make those partnerships. And so help us see those abilities that we may not at that moment in time. We need that role model. We need that network of others doing a little more than we're doing, or maybe doing less than we're doing, and we can be the role model in that situation. Knowing you're not alone is a lot of value in this work, because you do feel very alone when you come from a school where you're the only one and you're facing the uncertainty, the imperative that you're going to be blind someday, and it's not very pleasant to think about. All right, so that's that slide. So at RCPD, we emphasize ability. We expect a lot of our students. We use the MSU land grant mission to connect people to the knowledge that really can change their lives. And I think it's very rewarding work. And I thank all of you for helping prepare students who are ready to engage this, and for working with us, on programs like this when we can all do better together. I want to just take a minute. I'm gonna check my watch. 12:49. I still have 11 minutes. Well, we have about 10 minutes. So I just want to share the next slide. Got a couple bragging points, and if you're not bragging, then you're not remembering. Aaron Scheides was the first student I talked about. If you're from Oakland County, I remember, I think Farmington Hills is Oakland County, but I remember working with Dorothy Goldie around Aaron Scheides years ago, before he even came to MSU. Aaron came here with a progressive vision condition, and really is one of my role models for how he used athletics to overcome his own uncertainties, his own fears, and change the way people saw him. He began running, swimming, biking, and he headed our MSU triathlete club. And he went on to set world records in it. He wanted to be a physical therapist. People tell you when you're blind, you cannot be a physical therapist. You got to see to do that. He didn't believe it, and he didn't accept it as his future. So he went on, and we cheer Aaron on as he pursued his advanced degrees and became a physical therapist. This slide is a little outdated. He's now he was in Washington State with his wife, but I'm happy to say he's still with his wife, and he's got a couple of kids now, and he's a physical therapist. He just recently relocated to Alabama. So we maintain contacts with these students because their stories are so great, and we made an impact on them that they want to keep checking in. So celebrate what his teacher consultants and his team did for him at a very uncertain time for him in school when his vision was changing in Oakland County. Next slide. Jordan Castor, she came from the Grand Rapids area. Let's see, I think on the slide I tell where. Say it again.
Kentwood.
Kentwood, there it is. Yeah. So Jordan came, and her dream was to do something in technology. And she said, I just love the way my iPhone is doing a lot more for me, and I really want to work at Apple. I think it's a liberating company, and so I've got to be a computer scientist. I said, Jordan, you're going to hear it time and time again how hard it is to be a computer science. Don't let them beat you down. This is a tough program. And with her, and we built some networks with others we knew in the field, and she followed that dream and did it. And she went to work for Apple, still there. moving around. This document says she's in San Francisco. I know she's had some opportunities in this post-pandemic world, lives in Colorado now, just talked to her in the past few days again. You know, seeing those possibilities, she was benefited immensely by, you know, people who had done computer science before her, solved those tough math courses. And the predecessors to Tessa worked with her to do 3D modeling that we could do using a 3D printer. So she could see her physics problems that were 3D in her hand. And so some of those revolutionary technologies made some of the most difficult moments passable for her. Next slide, Dr. Dae-Hee Lee. This was one of my first stories. Dae-Hee Lee was actually here when I got to MSU in '92, but he was pursuing a doctorate degree in linguistics and a master's in computer science because he came from South Korea. And in South Korea, when you were blind, you were going to be a massage therapist. It was a guaranteed pathway for you, a decent income. But Dae-Hee said, I want to be a massage therapist. I love this new technology. And somehow he figured out that MSU was a leading program in linguistics and computer science. And he figured out we had a program around disability. He took a chance. He moved halfway around the world to be here. And he did wonderful things. And to say he worked at Google, I think the slide says that he's been around at all these high tech. He's a highly recruited person because he sees things differently. He sees the possibilities and he's innovating in technologies and sometimes in ways he can't even tell me about because they're so top secret. So happy to know Dae-Hee and happy to know that his higher ed experience with meeting other people and just thinking big served him so well. So Tessa, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Yep. So this is just our wrap up slide. It says, what do we say about you or what will we say about you and your students make a difference? So thank you so much for letting us present. I'm going to stop sharing. It looks like we got some stuff in the chat. We've got a couple of minutes. If anybody has questions, want to be respectful of everyone's time, of course.
And don't be shy.
Tessa, this is Johanna. I don't know if you saw in the chat the question I sent to you. If you want to readdress, you talked about it a little bit. But
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
It says, what qualifies a student at MSU to receive these services? For example, in order to receive these services, they're a visual acuity requirement, legally blind, a doctor's note, previous IBP. So good question. Just the documentation from a physician. So you don't have to meet, or students don't have to meet the threshold.
Did we lose you, Tessa?
I'm sorry? Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm in the office, so I don't know what the internet's doing. So a student doesn't have to be legally blind or meet a certain threshold per se to qualify for services at MSU. They just have to have a documented vision condition verified by a medical professional that impacts their ability to, you know, learn or some activity of daily living here at MSU. So sometimes we can accept an IEP or a 504 if there's like that weigh-in from a doctor. But if not, we'll just ask for it. We have a form on our website that students can have filled out, or sometimes they'll just have a note or a previous like health summary that has that information, the diagnosis, the impacts, the duration, those types of things, functional limitations.
Hold the audio now on mute.
So we still have a couple of more minutes for some questions. This is Pat speaking. I want to thank Mike and Tessa. What an awesome presentation. Mike, you shared so many wonderful ideas and gave us so many great suggestions. And I love your comment about building that confidence because, you know, as a blind person myself, you have to believe in yourself and have that self-confidence in order to succeed. Your statement about students finding or parents and teachers helping our students to find people just like themselves. that are very successful, to be mentors. That, we can't say enough about that. That is just so crucial, because a lot of times you may be the only one in your school district that is blind. I remember when I first started in high school, I was the only blind person at the high school. So everybody thought I was a superwoman. And it's like, no, I'm just a scared, 10th grader or whatever. And then finally some other people started coming along. So everything you shared on today was just very, very wonderful. So we
And Pat, I want to add to that too. One of the most, important things that I did when I finally realized that they weren't going to let me not carry a cane at some point was that orientation and mobility instruction, and that feeds so well into confidence. If you have a sense that you know where you're at, where you're going, and how to get there, that is so imperative. And I find it's. And I don't know if our O&M instructors just know how much of an important role they play, not only in safe travel, but in self-concept and self-capability.
Thanks for sharing that. And it's so crucial, because I tell people that I never would have went over to England, to the University of London when I was at MSU, if it hadn't have been for that mobility instruction, my mobility instructor, that I can take those skills and transfer those skills. And I know here at our agency, Sarah Creshlow and our parent liaison and myself, we're planning a workshop for parents and students this summer, where we are going to be talking about, those kinds of things, because it's so crucial for our students and for parents to know what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. So thank you so much. Michael, my other question, because I know we have to wrap up, you said that you guys mentioned 3D printing. So you guys have that at your office? And
Yes,
we invest in. Yes, absolutely. And it's so phenomenal. Jordan was the first beneficiary of it when we had the physics book, and making 3D models for the physics formulas that were visually 3D spatial for people. And she was missing out. And then today, Tessa's doing work on making landmarks around campus more visible, like our Beaumont Tower on campus is such an important icon for everybody to know, an MSU image. And as a blind person, I had no idea other than how people described what it looked like. But now she's got a 3D model, and we're going to do some things about that. And it's just one example, but knowing what things look like, how they fit together, there's some cool technologies out there that aren't in everybody's office. So, we team together, we see these things, and maybe we can all do better together.
Awesome. So we're going to be reaching out to you and Tessa, because Roxanne, our director, has purchased some 3D some 3D machines. And so we like to get trained on those. So so we'll be getting in touch with you guys to help us to get some training, or just to come out and take a peek at what you guys have done and what you're doing. So thanks again, everyone. We really, truly appreciate it.
From Carrie Ash.
Any last comments from Roxanne or any of my colleagues?
This is Roxanne, just again saying thank you. Always a good information to share out there. We appreciate everyone on. And Pat, you're right. We are going to definitely be in touch with a few of collaborations with you, Mike. So be ready for some conversations. Looking forward to it. One big shout out I just want to put out for those of you, speaking of students and teacher shortages, I want to say, don't forget we have a support team. Lynn Pensari's on here. We have a support team for new teachers, new O&Ms. Speaking of how much we appreciate those O&Ms, we don't want them leaving the field. We need to give them support. So if you know of any new people, have them contact Lynn Pensari. I meant to do a plug in that when I greeted everybody, but doing it now. So Mike, Tessa, thank you.
Thanks everybody for your work. You're making a difference every day.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.